The distress call, the signal was never meant to reach humans. It wasn't coded for them. It wasn't even written in a frequency their kind usually monitored. But it did. It bled through the background noise of the void like a scream in the dark. A burst of desperate voices, layered and static, pleading for aid. A distress call from a world called Threxus Prime, a green jewel orbiting a pale sun at the edge of the Persine fringe. The Threxians had never met humans. They didn't even know Earth existed. Their galaxy-wide networks had been sending automated requests for months, begging for intervention against the invading Krell Dominion. No one came. No council forces, no allied fleets. Every neighboring empire had already written them off as doomed. Until the humans heard it. The dreadnoughts were already moving by the time Threxian command realized who had answered. Massive warships, each built in orbit above Earth and Mars during the long, bloody decades of Saul's wars of survival. Their arrival would not be gentle. And among them, on the smallest of the carrier-class vessels, a single man leaned back in a battered chair, listening to the audio feed looping through static. His name was Elias Cade, ex-soldier, ex-mechanic, survivor of Earth's own age of fire. His job wasn't glory. He wasn't a captain or an admiral. He was just a systems engineer on the Iron Requiem. But something in that call froze him where he sat. Not the fear. Not the words he didn't understand. The tone. The way voices broke when people thought no one was coming. He knew it. He remembered it, because years ago, when Earth's skies had burned under alien fire, his own family had broadcast the same hopeless cry. No one had come for them. He came back from the war hardened, scarred, alive when they were not. Now, as he listened, Elias muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "Not this time. Someone's coming." Outside the viewport, the dreadnoughts stretched into the black steel titans with names etched like prayers. Iron Requiem, Saul's Vengeance, the Broken Spear. Their engines burned blue. Their hulls bristled with weapon arrays. They were Deathworlder ships, designed not for elegance or diplomacy, but to endure. To kill, to win, the Threxians had asked for help. What they would get was humanity. The message reached Threxian High Command 3 days later. Unidentified vessels dropping out of FTL. The council chambers of Threxus Prime trembled with panic. "These are not council ships," hissed High Overseer Verrill, his tendrils curling tight. "Look at them. Their design, primitive, brutal, crude. They are Predator's tools. We cannot allow them planetfall." But one voice cut through the chamber. Young, steady, carrying more conviction than authority. "Would you rather no one came?" The speaker was Lyra Valen, a cultural liaison and linguist. Barely 30 cycles old, yet bold enough to challenge the council's fear. "They heard our call when no one else did," she continued. "If they are dangerous, then good. Perhaps danger is what we need." Her words would echo later. For now, the decision stood. The strange newcomers would be watched, but not welcomed. Lyra didn't care. Something in her chest stirred when she looked at those crude, hulking ships on the orbital feed. For the first time in months, she felt something almost alien itself, not hope. And yet, when the dreadnoughts' first shuttles landed, the Threxians didn't meet diplomats or polished council envoys. They met humans. Tall, scarred, armored in matte plating that looked more like welding than artistry. Soldiers with rifles that hummed low with terrible power. Engineers carrying crates of tools, stomping onto alien soil as if it were their own backyard. At the back of one group, Elias Cade trudged down the ramp with a toolkit slung over his shoulder. He wasn't here for speeches. He was here to fix broken things, because there were always broken things. That's when he met her. Lyra pushed through the crowd, translator nodes glowing faintly along her neck ridges. "You are humans?" she asked, Voice uncertain but steady. Elias gave her a long look. His eyes were dark, tired, but sharp. "Yeah," he said simply. "We heard your call." Lyra swallowed. "And you came?" "Of course." Simple words. No flourish. But they carried the weight of something she hadn't realized she craved. The Council would later debate endlessly whether trusting the humans was a mistake, whether their violence would bring more ruin. But none of that mattered in that moment, because while Elias spoke, the skies above, Threxus Prime burned crimson. The Krell Dominion had arrived. The ground trembled as alien warships blotted out the sun. Sirens wailed across the city. And standing at the edge of the landing zone, Elias Cade looked up at the descending armada, rolled his shoulders, and muttered, "Guess we're just in time." The first shots fell like meteors. And the war began. The Deathworlders unleashed. The first barrage hit the outer districts. From the balcony of the command spire, Lyra watched as white-hot streaks fell from orbit, hammering into the ground like the fists of angry gods. Towers shattered. Energy shields flared and collapsed. The sky itself seemed to tear open. The Krell had come not to fight. They had come to erase. Sirens howled across Threxus Prime. People ran through the plazas in panicked swarms, their scales flashing pale with terror. Soldiers scrambled to man defense batteries that sputtered and died under electronic interference. And then the humans moved. Lyra had never seen war, not like this. Her people fought with formations, with ceremony. Their combat was orchestrated, ritualized. But the humans flowed forward like predators loosed into prey. Elias wasn't a soldier anymore. But when the first wave of Krell gunships descended, he grabbed the nearest plasma rifle from a human crate and snapped it to his shoulder like an old habit. His body moved before his mind caught up. The Krell soldiers hit the ground in droves. Hulking reptilian forms, plated in black chitinous armor, snarling through rebreathers. They were twice the mass of humans, claws sharp enough to rend steel. But mass didn't matter when the iron requiems. Dropships had disgorged men and women forged on the killing grounds of Earth. Contact left. Someone bellowed. The humans answered with fire. The air filled with the sound of rail slugs tearing through armor, of grenade detonations cracking like thunder, of shouted curses and clipped commands. They advanced low, fast, no hesitation. Lyra stood frozen, translator node buzzing faintly as it tried to catalog the chaos. This wasn't war. It was survival distilled into motion. A Krell warrior charged Elias, roaring, claws outstretched. Elias ducked, sidestepped, jammed the plasma rifle's muzzle under its jaw, and fired. The alien's head snapped back in a spray of heat and gore. Elias spat blood from his lip where a claw had grazed him and kept moving. He wasn't special among his kind. He was just human. The Krell had expected easy slaughter. Instead, they found themselves facing something far more dangerous. Predators who had learned to fight on a death world. On the command net, Admiral Heston of the Broken Spear barked orders. Requiem Squad, lock down the square. Spearfire teams, drive them into crossfire. Civilians behind the blue line, move. The dreadnoughts in orbit opened fire. Mass drivers the size of city blocks hurled tungsten rods at fractional light speed. They didn't bother with elegant energy beams. They used kinetic hell. Each impact on a Krell cruiser tore it in half, hull blooming outward in fire and debris. The sky itself bled wreckage, but the Krell didn't retreat. They poured more dropships into atmosphere, forcing humans and Threxians to fight street by street. Lyra ducked behind shattered stone as plasma bolts scarred the wall. She was no warrior, but she couldn't force herself to run. Not when she saw Elias crouched nearby, reloading with quick, practiced motions. "You'll die," she cried in her own tongue, voice trembling. "They will grind this city to ash." Elias glanced at her. His eyes were steady despite the chaos. Then we'll fight in the ash. Something in her chest clenched. She had expected saviors or monsters, not this stubborn, brutal will dot, and then she saw what humanity meant by engineer. A Krell gunship screamed overhead, tearing through their defensive line. Threxian soldiers fired desperately. Energy blasts glancing off its armored hull. Elias ripped the satchel charge from his belt, shoved it into the casing of a disabled ground turret, and slammed the panel shut. Sparks showered his hands. "Cover me." He barked. "What are you?" Lyra began, but then he spun the turret toward the skies. The system whined, overloaded, untested. He fired. The satchel charge detonated inside the turret's chamber, propelling a stream of molten plasma upward with catastrophic force. The beam struck the gunship broadside. It spun, engines screaming, before crashing into a row of towers in a ball of flame. Elias dropped back behind cover, his hands blistered, the turret smoking ruin. "Improvised," he muttered through clenched teeth. Lyra could only stare. Her people's engineers would have spent months recalibrating, debating, and refusing to risk failure. This man had seen a broken weapon and turned it into a spear in seconds. Humans didn't wait for perfect. They made do. Hours stretched into nightmare. The humans fought like wolves in a pack. Their armor bore scars. Their weapons overheated, but they refused to yield. Every block gained cost them blood, but every inch mattered. For the first time since the Krell invasion began, the Threxians were not merely running. They were holding by dusk. Smoke choked the sky. Krell bodies littered the streets, mingled with human dead. The cost was terrible, yet the city still stood. Lyra stumbled among the wreckage, numb, helping drag wounded into makeshift shelters. She watched Elias bind the leg of a bleeding Threxian soldier, with strips torn from his own undersuit, hands steady despite his own wounds. "Why?" she whispered, unable to hold back. "Why risk yourselves for strangers?" Elias didn't look up. "Because no one came for us once. I'm not letting that happen again." It was then she realized humanity hadn't come to conquer. They had come because they remembered what it felt like to be abandoned. But before she could speak, the sky split again. A shadow fell over the ruins. The Krell fleet had withdrawn. But not fully. Their largest ship, a Harrow-class dread carrier, descended lower than before, blotting out the stars. Its hull glowed with unfamiliar arrays, massive spines protruding like teeth. Elias looked up, face hardening. Something about the design made his gut twist. This wasn't a standard warship. It was something new. And then his calm crackled with words that froze the blood in his veins. "Requiem to ground teams," the voice rasped. "Krell are deploying a weapon. Unknown configuration. Data intercept suggests. Gods help us. It's targeting civilians." Lyra turned to him, scales pale. "What does it mean?" Elias stared at the sky. His grip tightened on the plasma rifle until his knuckles went white. "It means," he said, voice low and grim, "they're not here to win. They're here to wipe you out." Above them, the carrier's spines began to glow. The engineer's gamble. The spines along the Krell dread carrier pulsed brighter, humming with unnatural resonance. The very air trembled, pressure dropping as if the atmosphere itself were recoiling. Civilians screamed and scattered through the streets. Buildings groaned under invisible strain. Elias dropped to one knee, hands braced against the ground. He knew this vibration. Not the specifics, but the intent. He had felt something like it during Earth's siege years ago, when orbital weapons had boiled oceans and torn continents apart. The Krell weren't deploying a battlefield weapon. They were priming an extermination device. "Admiral, you seeing this?" Elias barked into his cone. "Confirmed," Heston's voice growled back. Unknown energy signature. We don't have a countermeasure online. Elias swore under his breath. He wasn't a commander. He wasn't even technically supposed to be groundside. But every instinct screamed that if he didn't act now, there wouldn't be a city left to argue about. He scanned the wreckage around him, shattered defense turrets, half-melted power conduits, the bones of an energy grid long dead. His mind spun. The Threxian's tech was elegant but fragile. His people's was crude but stubborn. Could he fuse the two? Lyra stumbled toward him, clutching a youngling she had pulled from the rubble. Her scales shimmered pale with terror. What is happening? They're charging something that'll kill everyone, Elias said flatly. I need access to your defense grid. Closest relay node where? She blinked, translating his words. The central hub was destroyed in the first strikes. But she pointed toward the smoking ruins of a spire across the plaza. There. Secondary conduit. Elias grabbed her wrist, pulling her into motion. Then that's where we go. They ran through streets littered with corpses and fire. Krell patrols prowled the alleys, but human squads bought them breathing room with bursts of gunfire and brutal ambushes. Every second mattered. By the time they reached the conduit spire, the vibrations overhead had grown almost unbearable. Glass cracked in windows. People bled from ears and noses. The spire was a wreck, half collapsed, power feeds severed, systems flickering with dying sparks. Elias dropped to his knees in the wreckage, toolkit open. His hands moved fast, pulling wires, stripping insulation with his teeth, grafting connectors together. He didn't know Threxian circuitry, but he knew flow, resistance, voltage. Some things were universal. Talk to me, he muttered. What's left in this grid? Lyra crouched beside him, translator blinking rapidly as she interfaced with the control node. Auxiliary capacitors, 3 still stable. Energy lines fractured in 5 places. Output limited. Limited is fine, Elias said. I just need one shot. He jammed the salvaged human power cell into the feed, sparks spitting. Gonna overclock the capacitors. Dump everything into one coherent burst. If we time it right, it might strike the weapon? Yeah. He wiped sweat from his brow, smearing grime. Might fry us too. But if we don't try, everyone dies anyway. The ground shook as a Krell patrol rounded the corner. 6 armored warriors. Weapons raised. Lyra's breath caught. Elias barely looked up. Buy me 60 seconds. She stared at him, then at the advancing monsters. Fear raged in her chest. She wasn't a soldier. She was a linguist, a negotiator raised on words, not war. But when she saw Elias bent over the circuitry, refusing to stop, something inside her snapped. She stood, grabbed a fallen plasma pistol, and leveled it with both shaking hands. The first shot went wide. The second struck true, searing through a Krell's shoulder. The alien roared. Stumbling human marines pounced from nearby cover, finishing the rest in a blur of close-quarters brutality. One of them clapped Lyra's shoulder, grinning through bloodied teeth. Not bad for a civvy. Her hands trembled, but when she looked back at Elias, she saw the faintest twitch of a smile on his lips. 30 seconds. Elias barked. The spire's remaining capacitors wailed like wounded animals, light building in the cracked conduits. The ground hummed beneath them. In the sky, the Krell carriers' spines reached critical glow. Energy arced between them, painting the heavens in jagged red light. Elias slammed his palm on the jury-rigged trigger. Now, the spire screamed. A column of energy ripped upward, unstable, surging like a wounded beast. It tore into the sky and struck the carrier's glowing spines just as they reached. Detonation. The effect was instant. The carrier shuddered. Its energy pattern collapsed in a cascade of explosions. Half the spines blew apart, hurling debris into orbit. The ship reeled, venting fire. The extermination weapon never fired. Instead, the Krell fleet withdrew in chaos, dragging their crippled flagship back into the upper atmosphere. For the first time in months, the Threxians had forced the invaders to retreat. The city roared with stunned, ragged cheers. Soldiers and civilians alike cried in disbelief. Against all odds, they had survived, but not everyone was pleased. Later that night, in the council chambers of Threxus Prime, Elias stood under harsh lights, hands bound. Human marines flanked him, tense. Lyra argued at his side, her voice sharp, defiant. "He saved us." She snapped at the assembled counselors. Without him, the city would be ash. High Overseer Varel's tendrils curled tight with disdain. He tampered with sacred systems without authorization. He risked destabilizing the planetary core. His recklessness could have doomed us all. "It worked," Elias said, voice hoarse but steady. "That is irrelevant," Varel hissed. "This human acts outside chain of command. He disrespects our sovereignty. He is dangerous." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Fear twisted into suspicion. Gratitude soured into doubt. Elias stared back at them, jaw clenched. He had seen this before. Desperate people lashing out, too afraid to trust what they didn't understand. He leaned forward, voice low. "If you'd rather die slowly than let us help, say it to my face. But don't pretend the Krell will spare you." Gasps filled the room. Varel's eyes flared with fury. "Guards, remove him." Lyra tried to intervene, but human marines held her back gently, regret in their eyes. Elias was dragged from the chamber, wrists bound, shoulders straight despite the jeers. In the shadows above the council floor, a pair of figures exchanged whispers. One was cloaked in traditional robes, face hidden. The other was a Krell agent, scales dark and eyes gleaming with cold amusement. "Good?" the cloaked figure murmured. "Distrust them. Blame them. The humans will fracture your people from within. And when the next strike comes..." The Krell agent's grin widened. "There will be no resistance." Hours later, Elias sat in a cell, back against cold stone, staring at the ceiling. His hands still stank of burnt circuitry. His ears still rang from the capacitor's scream. He thought of his family's last broadcast years ago, of the silence that answered, of the graves he never saw. He had sworn not to let anyone else feel that abandonment. Yet here he was, caged by the very people he had saved. His jaw tightened. Whatever came next, he wouldn't stop. Not while anyone still breathed. And as if to mock his resolve, the night sky outside lit with distant fire. The Krell had returned. Asterisk chains of trust. The cell was quiet, but not silent. Elias could hear the faint rumble of the city above. He knew that sound too well. The slow grind of fortifications being reinforced, the distant shouts of soldiers drilling, the cries of refugees crammed into makeshift shelters. Threxus Prime was bracing for another attack, and he was locked in the dark, useless. He sat on the edge of the narrow bench, rubbing raw wrists where the binding cuffs had dug into his skin. Rage burned in him, but not hot. Cold, focused. He could live with them hating him. He couldn't live with standing by while the Krell prepared another strike. The door clanked. A figure slipped in, scales catching the dim light. Asterisk. Lyra. She carried no guards, no attendants, only a faint glowstone clutched tight in her hand. Her eyes were hard, not with fear, but with defiance. "They shouldn't have done this," she whispered. Elias tilted his head. "You could get thrown in a cell just for being here." "I know." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "But you saved us, Elias, and I've seen the council chambers. They twist everything. The Overseer speaks of honor, of protocol, while the Krell tear our skies apart. He says you are reckless. I say you are the only one willing to fight. Elias studied her for a long moment. He could see how much it cost her to say those words. Her people prized obedience, ceremony, hierarchy. Breaking ranks was almost unthinkable. Then why tell me? He asked quietly. Because. She swallowed. Because I think there's more. The Krell knew where to strike. They knew our defense cycles, our evacuation routes. Someone is feeding them information. Someone in the council. Elias's jaw tightened. A traitor. Her voice dropped. Yes. The glowstone trembled in her hands as she leaned closer. And if they learn you suspect it too, you will never leave this cell alive. They didn't have long. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Lyra slipped back into the shadows as guards arrived. The door clanged open. On your feet, human. Elias rose slowly. 2 Threxian guards entered, armed with energy pikes. They shackled his wrists again and marched him through dim corridors. They didn't tell him where they were going. He already knew. The council chamber blazed with light. Overseer Veril sat at the central dais, tendrils coiled tight. Beside him, other counselors whispered and watched with wary eyes. The Krell regroup in orbit, Veril intoned. Our scouts report they will strike within the day. Yet this human undermines our command, risks our survival, and destabilizes our unity. What say you, Elias Cade of Earth? Elias stared up at him. His voice was steady, but hard enough to cut steel. I say you're wasting time pointing fingers while the Krell sharpen theirs. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Veril rose. You dare. The floor shuddered. The entire chamber lurched as distant explosions shook the city. Dust drifted from the ceiling. A panicked aide stumbled in. High Overseer. Krell bombardment from orbit. They target the outer districts. Veril's face twisted. Impossible. They should not yet be within range. Another tremor rocked the hall. Through the skylights, streaks of fire cut across the heavens. Orbital bombardment, but not random. Precise. Directed. They were hitting shelters. Civilian centers. Lyra's words rang in Elias's mind. Someone is feeding them information. Elias stepped forward, despite his shackles. You think this is coincidence? They know where to strike. You've got a traitor in your own damn house. Silence. Veril roared. You have no proof. Another explosion thundered outside, closer this time. The lights flickered, panels rattling. Screams echoed through the corridors as aides scrambled. Elias locked eyes with Lyra across the chamber. He saw her fear, but also her resolve. And in that instant, he made a choice. Get these off me, Elias snarled, holding up his shackles. Veril hissed. You remain bound until judgment. The ceiling cracked. A support beam groaned under impact. Elias turned to the guards beside him. If you leave me chained, you're already dead when this place collapses. Let me out, and I'll give you a chance to fight back. The guards hesitated, eyes flicking between Elias and the trembling ceiling. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Release him. The guards obeyed. Shackles fell to the ground. Elias rolled his shoulders, flexing bruised wrists. He looked back at Veril, voice low and cold. Sit here and argue about honor if you want. I'm going to save your people. Then he turned and strode from the chamber. Lyra followed without hesitation. The bombardment had grown relentless. From the streets below, Elias could see entire districts aflame. Human Marines fought to hold evacuation routes, dragging civilians from crumbling towers. But what struck him hardest was the precision. Every strike carved through defenses with surgical accuracy. This wasn't war. It was execution. He pulled Lyra into cover as another impact tore apart a block ahead. Where's your planetary shield control? Destroyed in the first attack, she said, coughing through smoke. We had backups, but they failed. Failed? His eyes narrowed. Or sabotaged? Her silence was all the answer he needed. Elias ground his teeth. If someone inside was guiding the Krell, then no defense was safe until that snake was cut out. But first, they had to keep the city from collapsing in the next 10 minutes. He scanned the wreckage, half-dead turrets, broken conduits, shattered power nodes. Too familiar. Too much like Earth's ruins years ago. He forced his mind into focus. If there was a way to tie human gear into Threxian systems, maybe he could jury-rig a shield patch long enough to buy breathing room. "Find me a power relay," he snapped. Something still intact, Lyra hesitated only a moment before darting into the rubble. Minutes later, they knelt over a cracked relay buried under debris. Elias pried it open, hands blackened with soot, and started ripping wires. He jammed in a human capacitor from his kit, soldering it with sparks that burned his skin. The relay hummed. Lights flickered dot above them. Faintly, a shimmer spread across the sky. Not a full shield, but a ragged patchwork bubble. Enough to blunt the next barrage. The city held its breath. The next volley of plasma fire streaked down and splashed against the half-formed shield, dispersing into dazzling bursts instead of annihilation. For the first time that night, people cheered. Elias slumped against the relay, exhausted, sweat streaking his soot-stained face. Lyra touched his shoulder. "You bought us time." He shook his head grimly. "Time's not enough. Not while someone on the inside is feeding them our guts." She met his eyes. "Then we find them, together." And in the distance, the Krell flagship prowled the skies, its spines glowing faint red once more. Asterisk fire from the sky, the night sky turned to fire. The Krell, dread carrier, descended lower, its spines glowing like molten spears. Behind it, 3 more warships moved into formation, their weapons arrays synchronized. They weren't reading this time. They were here to finish the job. Elias stood in the shattered plaza, sweat and soot streaking his face, staring upward. The half-shield he'd forced online shimmered weakly. A thin bubble stretched over only part of the city. It wasn't enough. Not against this. "Admiral," he barked into his comm, "tell me the Requiem still has teeth." Heston's voice crackled back through static. "Teeth, yes. Jawbone, not so much. They've adapted to our mass drivers. New shielding. Our barrages aren't punching through," Elias swore. The Krell were learning. That was the worst kind of enemy, one who took your best shot, studied it, and came back stronger. Around him, Threxian civilians pressed against walls, clutching their young. Human Marines moved among them, passing out rations, tightening defensive lines. There was no panic in the humans' movements, only grim preparation. Lyra stepped to his side, her scales ash-pale, eyes wide as she watched the Krell ships shift into firing position. "Can you stop them again?" Elias glanced at the relay he'd patched. The capacitor inside was already smoking. It wouldn't hold. Not like this. Not twice. Then what do we do? He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw raw exhaustion in his eyes. But behind it, something else. Stubborn fire. "We take the hit," Elias said, "and then we hit back harder." The bombardment began. Asterisk bolts of plasma screamed from orbit, each one a miniature sun. They struck the city with catastrophic precision. Towers collapsed. Streets vaporized. The patched shield flared, held against 2 strikes, then shattered with a thunderous crack. The next volley tore straight through. Lyra clutched Elias's arm as the ground bucked beneath them, the air rippling with heat. "We'll be destroyed." Elias dragged her into cover. Not if the dreadnoughts get in their way. Above, the Iron Requiem and her sister ships roared into motion. Great engines burned bright, maneuvering to intercept the Krell bombardment. They fired everything: rail cannons, missile salvos, swarms of automated drones. Space lit up in a storm of metal and fire. For a moment, hope surged. A Krell cruiser buckled under the sheer weight of kinetic fire, tearing in half. Wreckage rained across the atmosphere. The humans cheered. Then the Krell dread carrier bared its fangs. New spines along its hull glowed deep crimson. An energy wave rippled outward, invisible but devastating. The human dreadnoughts shuddered as systems across their hulls went dark. EMP. Elias shouted instinctively. They've built a damn field generator. The iron Requiem's lights flickered, then died. Engines sputtered. Weapon arrays fell silent. The massive warship drifted, helpless, in orbit. On the come, Heston's voice roared through bursts of static. We've lost main power. Shields offline. Backup systems aren't responding. The channel cut. Elias slammed his fist into the wall. God damn it. Without the dreadnoughts, Threxus Prime was naked. The next bombardment wave ripped through the city. Whole districts vanished in fire. Thousands died in seconds. Lyra's people screamed. Many fell to their knees, praying, weeping. The council ordered retreat to underground shelters, but Elias knew shelters were death traps against sustained orbital fire. He grabbed Lyra's shoulder, forcing her to look at him. We can't hide underground. We've got to move people into the ruins, spread out. Make it harder for them to target groups. Her scales flushed with confusion. Scatter? That breaks all protocol. Protocol's killing you, Elias snapped. You want to live, or you want to follow rules into the grave? For a long second, she stared at him, trembling. Then she nodded. Together, they ran through the chaos, shouting orders, dragging civilians from shelters into the rubble-strewn streets. Human Marines backed them, setting up makeshift corridors of fire to keep Krell patrols at bay. It was madness. It was desperation. But it worked. The Krell bombardment, designed for clustered targets, began striking empty ruins instead of packed shelters. People lived, for now, but the dreadnoughts still hung dead in orbit. Elias paced the ruins of Akum's tower, staring up at their hulks. The Iron Requiem, the Broken Spear, the Sol's Vengeance, 3 titans. Paralyzed, they'll never power back up before the Krell finish us. He muttered. Lyra stood beside him, her voice quiet. Is there no way to restart them? Elias froze. His mind spun. Restart them. He thought of Earth's wars, of battlefield repairs in the mud, of jury-rigging broken tanks with half-melted batteries. He turned to her, eyes burning. Maybe there is. But it means getting aboard while they're dead in the water. Her jaw tightened. That's impossible. Krell ships patrol the orbit. Any shuttle would be destroyed. Yeah, Elias said grimly. That's what makes it a gamble worth taking. He laid it out fast. The dreadnoughts carried auxiliary fusion cores, isolated from main systems. If he could force one into ignition, he could cascade power back through the grid. But he'd need access. Direct access. Lyra stared at him. You would board a crippled warship under enemy fire? Elias gave a dry chuckle. Lady, I've done dumber things for less important reasons. She touched his arm, scales cool against his burned skin. You are reckless, but perhaps recklessness is what we need. Before they could act, the sky lit again. The Krell dread carrier fired a new kind of beam, not plasma, not bombardment. A focused lance of crimson energy. It struck the broken spear. The dreadnought's hull split open like paper, venting fire and bodies into the void. Elias's throat went dry. Christ! The humans in the streets fell silent, staring upward at their dying ship. Lyra whispered, They can destroy your titans as easily as our cities. Elias clenched his fists. His people weren't titans. They weren't gods. They were just stubborn, fragile, furious humans who refused to stay dead. And if that meant throwing himself into the jaws of hell to kickstart a crippled dreadnought, so be it. He turned to Lyra, voice hard as steel. "Get me a shuttle." Her eyes widened. "They will kill you. They'll try." Above them, the iron requiem drifted, silent and cold, while the Krell prepared their next shot. Asterisk, the hidden enemy. The shuttle rattled like a tin can as it broke through the upper atmosphere. Elias sat strapped in, helmet clamped, one hand gripping the bulkhead as the craft shuddered under the heat of re-entry. Across from him, 2 Marines checked weapons in silence, their faces grim. Lyra sat beside him, her slender frame almost swallowed by the human flight harness. Her eyes never left the viewport. Where the broken outline of the iron requiem loomed ahead, the dreadnought hung in orbit like a corpse. Its hull was scarred and pitted, drifting powerless, lights dead. A ship built to terrify galaxies, reduced to a silent tomb. Still think this is insane? Elias asked over the intercom, voice dry. Lyra tore her gaze away from the void. Of course it is insane. That is why it might work. The Marine across from Elias gave a humorless laugh. That's the human way, isn't it? Do the stupid thing nobody expects. Elias smirked. Damn right. The shuttle latched onto the dreadnought's airlock with a metallic thud. The hatch opened with agonizing slowness. For a moment, nothing stirred. No lights. No hum of power. Just silence. The Marines went first, rifles raised. Elias followed, boots clanking against the deck. The corridors of the iron requiem stretched out before them. Dark and hollow. It felt like walking inside a mausoleum. Emergency strips glowed faintly, casting pale red light across walls streaked with scorch marks. Floating debris bumped gently against their armor. A child's drawing, a stick figure family taped to the bulkhead, drifted past. Alias's visor before he caught it and tucked it into a pocket. Lyra whispered, "So quiet." "Ship this size should never be this dead," Elias muttered. "Makes my skin crawl." They reached the auxiliary reactor bay. Massive coolant pipes stretched overhead like the ribs of a steel beast. The reactor itself sat dormant in the center, a sleeping giant. Elias knelt by the control panel, pulling off scorched plates, exposing blackened circuitry. He whistled low. "Well, here's the good news. She's intact. Bad news. She was shut down on purpose." The Marine frowned. "You mean the Krell's EMP?" "No." Elias jabbed at the disconnected conduits. "This wasn't EMP damage. This was sabotage." Lyra stiffened. "You mean a human did this?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He stared at the severed lines, the deliberate cuts, the bypassed safeties. Not haphazard. Surgical. Someone who knew exactly what to kill. "Yeah," he said finally, voice flat. "Somebody on this ship wanted her dead." The revelation sank like a stone. The Marines cursed under their breath. Lyra looked stricken, tail lashing. "But why? Why betray your own kind when so many depend on you?" Elias stood, face grim. "Because the Krell aren't just brute force conquerors. They've always known fear's a sharper weapon than claws. You seed a traitor, make the mighty dreadnoughts look helpless, and suddenly whole worlds stop resisting." Lyra whispered, "But it means your enemy is not only out there." She glanced at the shadows of the ship around them. "But in here as well." Elias nodded grimly. "Exactly. Which means we don't have long before they realize we're trying to restart her." They worked fast. Asterisk. Elias stripped cables with a plasma cutter, rerouted coolant valves by hand, bypassed half the safeties. Sweat poured down his face inside the helmet. Every spark risked ignition. Every weld was one heartbeat closer to death. Lyra stayed by his side, reading human schematics with growing understanding. She passed him tools, called out pressure readings, adjusted stabilizers. Her hands trembled at first, but steadied as Elias barked quick, sharp instructions. "You're a natural, kid," Elias muttered without looking up. Her crest flushed violet with pride. "Then teach me faster." Then the footsteps came, a clatter in the corridor. Boots. Human. Boots. The Marines swung rifles up instantly. Contact. Figures emerged from the dark. Human crew, or what was left of them. Gaunt faces, hollow eyes. And among them, one officer in pristine uniform, holding a sidearm steady. Commander Yalin. Elias froze. He knew the man. Cool, sharp, ambitious. Always whispering about alliances, about practicality over principle. "Stand down, Elias," Yalin said coldly. "You don't know what you're doing." Elias rose slowly, sweat dripping down his face. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm getting this ship back online before the Krell torch every last city on Threxus." Jalen's eyes were hard. "And what then?" "We limp away, by a few days at best, before they return in force." "You think humanity can fight them forever? You think we're invincible?" "Not invincible," Elias growled. "Just stubborn enough to keep getting back up." Jalen's hand tightened on his weapon. "Stubbornness won't save us. Survival will. The Krell offered me a choice. A chance for humanity to kneel, instead of burn. I chose survival." The Marines cursed, fury in their eyes. Lyra gasped. "You doomed us all for a lie." Yalin sneered. "You're primitives clinging to fantasy." "Elias, don't force me to kill you. Walk away. Let this ship die, and maybe our people live." Elias took a step forward, voice low and hard. "No, our people don't live on their knees. Not now, not ever." The airlock behind Yalin hissed. More shapes emerged. Krell soldiers, armored, spined, their jaws clattering. Side by side with the human traders. The Marines opened fire instantly. Plasma bolts lit the dark, tearing through the corridor. Krell shrieked, claws raking metal as they surged forward. Elias grabbed Lyra and dove behind the coolant pipes. "Get that ignition online," he barked. She scrambled to the console, hands shaking but determined. I don't know which conduit." "Top left manifold." Elias shouted, firing his sidearm blindly into the chaos. "Bleed the coolant, then override the failsafes. Do it." Lyra slammed her claws into the panel, sparks showering her face. The reactor hummed faintly, a vibration running through the deck. The ship was waking. Alen, single quotes, voice roared over the firefight. "Stop him. Kill them both." A Krell warrior vaulted the coolant pipes, slamming Elias to the deck. Claws scraped across his helmet, denting the visor. Elias grunted, shoving the barrel of his sidearm up under its jaw, firing until the alien collapsed in a smoking heap. Lyra screamed as another Krell lunged at her. Elias spun, firing just in time to drop it inches from her face. "Keep going." He yelled. The hum grew louder. The auxiliary reactor glowed faintly. Systems flickered. Lights along the corridor blinked alive one by one. But then Yalin himself appeared, weapon raised, aiming squarely at Lyra. Elias saw it. He didn't think. He moved. The shot rang out. Lyra flinched, expecting death. But it didn't come. Elias staggered in front of her, a scorch mark burning across his shoulder armor. He gritted his teeth, smoke curling from the wound. Yalin cursed, adjusting aim for a kill shot, and the deck trembled. The reactor roared to life. Light blazed through the chamber, panels flaring, power surging through conduits. The iron requiem shuddered, her titanic heart beating again. Elias grinned through the pain. "Rise and shine, you old beast." The dreadnought systems cascaded awake. Engines rumbled. Weapons primed. Across orbit, the Krell ships paused as their prey stirred back to life. Jalen's face twisted in fury. "You've doomed us all, Elias." "They'll never stop now." Elias raised his weapon, eyes cold. "Good. Gives us something to fight." The reactor's glow bathed them all in firelight. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Asterisk, the dreadnoughts awake, the iron requiem roared back to life. Engines blazed. Deck plating shook. Weapons hummed with lethal charge. For the first time since the Krell's EMP blast, the dreadnought breathed like a living giant awakening from its grave. Elias leaned against the coolant pipe, clutching his burned shoulder. Pain blurred the edges of his vision, but he forced a grin. "That's it, girl. Show them you're not dead yet." Lyra crouched beside him, eyes wide as the ship's systems cascaded awake. She had never heard such power, a rumble that filled the bones, a vibration that made the air itself tremble. It lives." "Damn right it does." In orbit, the Krell dread carrier and its escorts shifted. Their spines glowed, forming into firing arcs. They had seconds before the Krell unleashed everything to crush the newly reawakened human. "Warship, bridge is still offline," Elias muttered, pulling himself to his feet. "Which means nobody's steering this beast. We've got to kick her the rest of the way awake." The Marines regrouped, their armor scorched, but spirits blazing with sudden fire. "Say the word," one growled. Elias limped forward, voice hard. "We're taking the bridge." The corridors were chaos. Yalen and his Krell allies weren't finished. The traitor had pulled back with surviving soldiers, turning bulkheads into barricades. Gunfire roared as humans fought humans in the dreadnought's heart. Lyra stayed at Elias's side, firing a scavenged rifle with fierce precision. Each time she flinched at recoil, Elias barked, "Again. Keep pressure on them." And she did. Step by bloody step, they advanced through the steel labyrinth. Marines cleared doorways with grenades. Elias smashed controls with his sidearm's butt to force hatches open. Jalen's voice echoed over the intercom, bitter and furious. "You think you've won something, Elias? This ship's resurrection changes nothing. The Krell cannot be stopped. Every system they conquer bends the knee or burns. You delay the inevitable." Elias snarled back. The inevitable's just another word for what cowards settle for. Finally, they stormed the bridge. Jalen was waiting. His uniform immaculate, despite the chaos, his pistol steady, and beside him, 2 Krell bodyguards, their spines rattling. "Drop your weapons," Yalen said coolly. "End this madness. Humanity doesn't need heroes. It needs survivors." Elias stepped forward, blood dripping from his burned arm, eyes burning with fury. Survivors without freedom aren't living. They're just corpses that forgot to fall over. Jalen's jaw clenched. He raised his pistol, but Lyra fired first. Her bolt took the weapon from his hand, blasting it across the deck. "No more lies," she hissed, voice trembling with rage. The bridge erupted into chaos. Marines engaged the Krell bodyguards, plasma fire searing the air. Elias lunged for the console, slamming his bloody hand onto the manual ignition. Panels lit, controls flared. The iron requiem shuddered as full systems came online. "Bridge control restored," a synthetic voice announced. Outside, the dreadnought's main batteries turned toward the Krell. The carrier unleashed its crimson lance again, but this time, the iron requiem shields flared, catching the beam in a storm of blue light. The ship shook violently, alarms blaring, but held. Elias grinned through gritted teeth. "Hit back," the dreadnought answered. Its main guns roared, a storm of kinetic fire lancing through the void. The lead Krell cruiser shattered under the barrage, its hull split into incandescent fragments. A missile salvo followed, ripping into the second escort. The Krell staggered, and then, as if stirred by their sister's revival, the other human dreadnought, Saul's Vengeance, flickered to life. Auxiliary cores ignited, lights blazing across its hull about the battlefield, shifted in an instant. But Yalin wasn't done. He broke from cover, diving at Elias with a combat knife, eyes wild. "You'll damn us all." He roared. Elias caught his wrist mid-swing. The blade skimmed across his armor, biting flesh beneath. Pain flared white-hot. "You already did." Elias snarled back. He twisted, slammed Yalin against the console. The traitor struggled, snarling like a beast, but Elias drove his fist into the man's face, once, twice. Yalin spat blood, grinning through broken teeth. "You can't kill me, Elias, even if you win today. Tomorrow, there'll be another me." Elias shoved him back against the panel, pressing the knife to his throat. His voice was low, shaking with fury and grief. "Then tomorrow, we'll fight him too." He drove the blade home. Yalin gasped once, eyes wide with disbelief, then went still. Elias let the body fall. The Krell dread carrier reeled as the dreadnought's combined fire ripped into its hull. Spine snapped, armor split, energy surging across its frame. It tried one last desperate gambit, charging its crimson lance for a final blast. Elias slammed the fire control. All batteries now. The Iron Requiem and Saul's Vengeance fired in unison. Rail slugs the size of trucks tore through the dread carrier's core. Missiles erupted across its spine. Plasma arcs lanced deep into its reactor. The behemoth split apart in a blinding explosion. The sky over Threxus. Prime lit brighter than dawn. Silence followed. Then, cheers on the planet below. Survivors poured from the ruins, voices raised in a chorus that reached the heavens. Marines whooped and pounded armor. Even Lyra let out a raw, triumphant cry, her scales glowing bright with joy. Elias slumped into the command chair, exhausted beyond measure, blood soaking his uniform. But he smiled, eyes on the burning wreckage drifting in orbit. "Deathworlders," he muttered. "That's what they call us. Monsters from a cursed planet." Lyra turned to him, her voice soft but fierce. "Not monsters. Not to me. To me, you are the reason we still draw breath." Elias looked at her, and for the first time in days, let himself breathe deep. Hours later, when the fires dimmed and emergency crews worked the ruins, Elias stood on the city's shattered walls with Lyra beside him. The two dreadnoughts loomed above, scarred but alive, guardians in the sky. "Your world still standing," Elias said quietly. "Our world," Lyra corrected, her voice firm. "You fought for it as if it were your own. Does that not make it yours too?" Elias chuckled softly, then winced at the pain in his shoulder. "Careful, or I'll start believing it." But far beyond Threxus, in the black halls of Krell Command, the defeat did not go unnoticed. The High Claw watched the destruction of their carrier in silence, spines quivering with fury. At last, one hissed, "So, the humans rise again." Another replied, voice sharp as broken bone, "Then next time, we do not cripple them." "No," the High Claw rasped. "Next time, we erase them." Elias watched the stars from the ruined wall, the night sky glittering. He knew this wasn't the end. The Krell would return, harder, stronger, but humanity would be, waiting, stubborn, resourceful, compassionate. Deathworlders. And when the next SOS echoed across the stars, the galaxy would remember what happened here. That when the aliens called for help, it was the Deathworlder dreadnoughts that answered.